Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about embracing self-acceptance, healing from past mistakes. And today I have a very wonderful guest in our virtual studio, Alli Spotts-De Lazzer. And I'm going to introduce her first, and I'll get her to introduce herself. Alli is a marriage and family therapist, LPCC, and certified eating disorder specialist with a private practice in Studio City, California. She's the author of the book MeaningFULL, 23 Life-Changing Stories of Conquering Dieting, Weight, and Body Image Issues, and a Psychology Today column also titled MeaningFULL. Alli has published articles in peer-reviewed journals and trade magazines, presented workshops at international conferences, graduate schools, and hospitals, served on the advisory committee overseeing the National Certified Eating Disorder Specialist curriculum, and created #ShakeIt for self-acceptance, a movement that embodied its message through dance and incorporated mental health education. A believer in advocacy work, she volunteers for various organizations. That's a wonderful bio, Alli. I'm very excited to talk to you today, especially since, body image is one of the biggest things that a lot of people struggle with and, kind of have to forgive themselves for later on in life. And so we'll get into today's topic very soon. But before we do that, I would love to get you to introduce a bit more about yourself to our audience. How did you get here and why did you choose to do the work that you're doing now?
Oh my goodness. First of all, thank you very much for having me. For listeners, we are on very different locations and time zones, so just really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And why do I do the work I do now? I came to it much later in life, and I think for me, psychology is a wonderful space to come to after you've done some living and learning. So basically how I got here was something happened where I had a car accident, believe it or not, and it made me be very, very, very quiet. And for years, people had told me I should be a therapist, but I had my own eating disorder and it was very active. And I was like, I could never be a therapist because for me, I wouldn't do this work while still having an eating disorder. So I just kind of ruled it out that it would never happen. Long short is once this car accident happened, I didn't even realize it, but I was like, oh my gosh, I can redo my life and my career right now, and I don't have that in the way. So it was that's an abridged version. So I went back to grad school, and I think it took a little bit, even in grad school, I wasn't sure this was going to be my career because I changed so many things in my life. And it was so solidifying when I just fell in love with this. And I've now been doing this since I started school in 2006. And it's never boring. It's always fulfilling. It's always challenging. So that's how I got here and I stay here. I think for me, the most important piece is staying here.
Yeah, definitely. And that's beautiful to hear, and I think sometimes there are a lot of things that happen in life, but sometimes there's something big that happens and it changes our perspectives completely. And that's kind of like the story of a lot of our guests, and a lot of people that I've met actually. When they kind of talk about like the dual life. Like I was in law, and then now I am a cellist. It's wonderful.
And I would never have slowed down enough had that not happened. Where literally my body had to slow down, everything had to slow down. So it was such a, people didn't understand, and I was like, oh no, I'm so grateful for this opportunity. So
yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry to hear about the accident. Obviously, that must have been, something tough to go through. But the silver lining is you got something wonderful out of that. And, to do one fulfilling work and to stay with it is actually something that we all want to look for. So that's really great to hear. And, I think you're going to have a lot of stories to share with us as well, especially on the topic of self-acceptance and, forgiving yourself for past mistakes. We'll go into that soon. Before we do that, we have a section called Have You Met Alli? So get to know you even better and getting some of your recommendations or, things that you love, things that speak about you. First thing I would love to ask is, what is a book you would recommend to our audience?
Uh, I would, my friends would get so mad at me if I didn't say my own.
Of course, you got to say your own. So for those that are not watching but just listening, what is the book and what is it about?
Oh, MeaningFULL, 23 life-changing stories of conquering dieting, weight, and body image issues. It's a very, very non-traditional book. A lot of stories about finding freedom from dieting and body, diet culture and body image acceptance and things are either memoirs of one person's story or long short is it's 23 mini bios, mini memoirs, followed by expert clinical commentary. And I tried to find free resources and references that I could also give people to, if they wanted to learn more about these different topics that are introduced throughout the book. Learning is often, I buried a lot of learning in these wonderfully touching stories because I think that entertainment can teach us a lot more than me preaching or talking or sharing data from a book. So that's what it is. It's gotten really beautiful feedback. It launched during COVID, so the outreach has not been quite what it would have been if you could, at the time have gone on book tours and stuff. But the impact, the feedback's been really, I'm so grateful. It's a book I needed when I was sick.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear.
Thanks, and it's not for people who, it ranges from just normal, like everyday, what so many of us go through, all the way up through clinical severe eating disorders, because it affects people in different ways.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's interesting to hear. And, to be honest, I have an interesting relationship with food. Some days are better than the others. Not that I have an eating disorder per se, but, I find that it's kind of like this thing that is really hard to manage sometimes, because before you realize it, you're kind of not eating the usual amount, or you're not eating the usual, healthy food that you would eat because of something that is stressing you out or because of something that is kind of depressing you. That happens to me quite often. And, I think it's like emotional eating on some days. And I think people and most of my friends have struggled with this. We talk about it. So I think that's an interesting read for sure.
Well, and do you mind me giving you I know we have to get to know me, but I give you a little bit of feedback. Like, if you emotionally eat, that's okay. I mean, it's a coping tool, as long as you've got some more tools in your toolbox so that it doesn't end up actually hurting you. Because it's supposed to help.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not something that has taken over my life, so that's okay. Because I go to the gym a lot. I enjoy, working out and going hiking and things like that. So I kind of try to direct my attention to doing active things rather than, sitting at home and eating nowadays. So I've learned to cope better. Not that I'm perfect at it, but, there are lots of different things that I can do. And I think that's the cool thing about learning and growing in life, right? You just observe and actually forgive yourself for making mistakes and move on. So yeah, we'll talk about today's topic soon. I mean, it's such a great topic. I cannot wait to talk about it. But I have to ask the next question because I'm curious, what is a movie you would recommend?
Movies, I am the worst at movies. I literally can get to almost the last scene of a movie and then say, oh my gosh, I have seen this. Whereas up till then, I was sure I did not.
Yeah.
I don't think I would say that that's when it comes to movies, that's what I connect with, is that I am hilarious about movies. One of my favorite movies, though, that I really could just watch over and over is, and forgive me because it's going to riff off of what you just said, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, man. That is the original was such a great movie.
Mm-hmm. It is a great one. So well done. So then you are now on a podcast, and I've also heard that you've been on quite a few podcasts. What is a podcast you would actually recommend to our audience?
I would recommend to the audience any podcast that either changes your worldview, opens you up to think about different things, or connects with you on a deep level where you can kind of feel it.
Okay, so this has to be personal then.
I do. I really, like if I had kind of written out my answers prior, if I'm going to recommend any podcast to anyone, it's going to be this one because you and I are talking right now and it's this one. But when I really think about with the incredible amount of stuff coming at us every day that's informational, to allow yourself to really emotionally connect or let it build your critical thinking. I think both of them are so valuable.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
And
that's
then there's
great to hear.
entertainment.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like edutainment because you learn a lot and, some people are just really fun to listen to, great to relate to as well. So yeah, I think it's personal and thank you for sharing that. Next question. I know we said famous in the question list, but I actually want to ask who's your role model in general? And it doesn't have to be a famous person, could just be someone in your life.
I have, I actually have many. I think that a role model, when we look at all of our relationships, we have lots of role models. But I want to share two very briefly that tickle me. For graciousness, do you remember kind of old Hollywood graciousness when, so I got to meet Liza Minnelli a while ago, and she looked at me as if I was the only person in the room. And as I told her what she meant to me and how much I admired her work and how she kind of helped form musical theater, and she could not have thanked me more in a way that it was almost like she was receiving her first compliment. And she's been around and gotten so many. So for graciousness, at that moment was absolutely inspiring that someone could hold on to that level of just grace and graciousness when she's been adored often. And then Lin-Manuel Miranda. I guess I've got a theme going on with the musical theater. But there's just so much about the way that his mind works and how his creativity and how he clicks people into learning through creativity. Who ever thought of doing, rap and musical theater about our founding fathers? He has just done so much to change how kids learn and how the musical theater world functions, and to popularize something that wasn't mainstream. So to me, if, people will, when I have to kind of unstick my mind, I'll even think, how would Lin-Manuel Miranda handle this? And sometimes it helps me get unstuck.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you for sharing that. So next question, and also the last one in this part, is what is a course you've completed that really had a strong impact on you?
A course I've completed that really had a strong impact on me was probably a few months ago. And I don't mean to be so me-focused on this, but it was, I got to be faculty on the National Eating Disorder core course curriculum. So I actually got to help design and develop quite a bit of it. And then I got to teach it. And so I spent quite a few years doing that. And this was my last year of teaching it. And so it was really just such a rewarding experience to see when you see people click into the material. Plus the 2 years before had been COVID. So everything was talking to a camera with no people. So that was the course I completed, both creating and teaching.
All right, so let's talk about embracing self-acceptance, healing from past mistakes. And of course, we have to talk about well-being because that's why we're here. So my first question to you, and this is very personal, what does well-being mean to you?
Well, well-being, I came up with two ideas of what well-being means. Well-being for me is a state of being well, and well is multidimensional. But when I really thought further for me, it's a steady contentedness with a sense of safety. And then I also thought about, well-being. I think of well-being for my clients, patients, people, whatever we want to call the people I work with. And in my head, I'm always focused on well-being, which is also kind of the intention of best interest. And I thought that was interesting how there's like a state of well-being, and then there's almost an intentional quality to it when used for someone else.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it, because most of the time we discuss the state of well-being on the show, not the intention per se. And so, with intention comes a lot of different aspects, I would say, because when you think about intention for yourself and for others, it can encompass a lot of different ideas and each to their own. So, the intention for well-being for you today might be different tomorrow. And for people in different life stages, it varies.
There's a total fluidity of it. And that's in one of the questions that you had sent to me, it was one of the misunderstandings. When you think of a state, it's like it's static, it's stuck. Whereas well-being one day may be very different a week later. What's in the best interest of their well-being? What is their well-being? How do we get to that right now, just in this moment versus the fluidity of later?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions, actually, because it's kind of like this thing where we always, in general, we always strive for the best state of well-being. And sometimes I think we neglect the fact that it's okay if it feels off today. It's okay if it feels off for a while, as long as you're taking care of yourself and what exactly is your intention actually with your well-being right now. Is it just to feel okay, feel balanced, or is it actually to heal from something? For example, healing from past mistakes, a very big thing.
Well, even what you were just saying, you're so right in that. Oh gosh, you had said one sentence and it just popped out of my mind. But I liked where you were going with the intentionality and the static of it, as if it's like achievable. Even something when you first started speaking, it was like, we've reached well-being, have a celebration, and then we let it go. No, it's more.
Yeah.
It like morphs, and then we look for how to reach the next state of well-being. It's usually cued by maybe what we're needing or wanting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I feel like it's a journey, and it will have a lot of ups and downs. And sometimes when, we're at a peak state of our well-being, like the best state of well-being we've ever had, we kind of feel like, oh yes, like I've got there. And then something happens, then it goes down. And then you kind of like, oh, now I feel weird. And, I'm not sure if the audience can relate with this, but that's totally normal. Actually, I know that a lot of people go through that, myself included. I'm sure you too, right? We go through all these, fluctuations of well-being, and it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of this. The acceptance piece is kind of noticing that pattern's there, accepting it, not like freaking out or fighting it, like being ashamed of one day you're up here and then the next day you feel like not good.
Yeah.
we are going to not curse today. We're trying.
Yeah. We'll try to be nice and be good. So, yeah, we'll be there.
Lou, I wanted to ask you, for you've heard so many guests talk about it.
Yeah.
For you, what is resonating as your own idea about well-being for Lou?
Well, thank you for asking, first of all. Second of all, I think someone might have asked me this question. I don't remember what I answered before, but right now, right now, that would be interesting. I'm just saying that because it would be interesting for me to hear back what I said before. Right now, for me, it means feeling balanced, because I haven't felt, balanced in a while, and it feels a bit weird. So it's important for me to nurture that balance in my life. And the word balance is also interesting because it's not, a one size fits all. No, my balance is very different from your balance. And what I mean by that is I want to feel just normal. I want to wake up, feeling light. I want to, do different activities and doing different things with the same kind of enthusiasm. And to me, that's the current balance that I'm working towards. And as I said, it's a journey. So, some days are better than others. But yeah, that's how I see it right now.
Yeah, and kind of weaving in the self-acceptance piece, when you just said, what's normal, there will be days that it will feel abnormal.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you did something to mess it up, or maybe it does, but like to kind of notice that and be like, okay, let's, minus the feeling piece of this, what's going on for me? I accept that today it doesn't feel great. And I love that I just learned for you, balance is a piece. I'm learning teeny bits about you as we go, like the food piece, which hopefully we'll get to loop back to at some point.
Yeah.
But like balance is one of your domains for, if we took a, pie chart and divided up well-being, I think it would be really different for each of us.
Yeah.
And another thing that people often, I think, really mistake well-being with is a state of wellness. It's almost like there's illness and wellness, whereas it's not just a physical or an absence of illness. Well-being is so many domains that are personalized. I can't, like, my well-being is cruddy if I'm not laughing, because part of me finds humor in truth. And I mean, my clients, patient people, they know that sometimes they may tell me something that is not, like, it's not funny. But when that naked, beautiful truth is in the room, I just like, because there's something so beautiful and funny about that in a respectful way. Sometimes truth is funny. And so if I'm not finding the humor, the irony, those things, I know that my well-being is off. My wellness is off.
Definitely. I think it's such a personal thing. And, when you hear conversations, you can certainly pick things up. And I think that's why we have this question about misconceptions as well, because then we can also notice different ways that people view well-being. And I also think, actually, I haven't mentioned this before, but I also think misconceptions is something that is also probably subjective. Some are definitely universal, but others might not, because something that you notice to be sort of weird to you might not be the case at all, because each person is very different. And I think that is also a big piece of self-acceptance, which is today's topic. For some people, when they're working on their well-being, the self-acceptance might come across as something that is off to others. And what I mean by that is, I'm accepting myself for, not doing such a great job right now. And I let myself, neglect certain aspects of life and focus on my well-being and, just feeling the work of every day. And for some people, they might go, but why? Because you should be working on your career, or, you should be climbing the next ladder or the next steps in your life. And that's well-being. But to me right now, it's not. Or some people might say, oh, like you should be exercising more. I am. But, like if I'm saying to my friends, you should be exercising more without considering how their well-being is, that is a misconception. And that might not be good, because, they're self-accepting the fact that they don't feel so great. And they probably don't like exercising as much, but they want to, spend more time reading or working on a hobby. That would work for their well-being at that particular state. So I think for me, like self-acceptance is such a big thing. It's kind of interweaved with today's conversation about what we just mentioned. And I'm sure you have your own take on self-acceptance. So what does self-acceptance mean to you?
I do, and I'm going to define it. Just going back, though, it's interesting when you were pointing out, that your friends may have you may think they're not exercising enough. I think the first piece is, you're right, it's so individual. What is enough? What is too much? I just invite people to try to check in with what allows them to be their most contented and fullest in the world. And so there will be the right amount of movement for a person to feel good, to feel strong, to feel whatever they want to feel, as well as if they were trying to balance laboratory work and this and that. But even what you said, it's not. There's recommendations, but then there's also life circumstances and other things. Exercise links to, neurotransmitters. Exercise links to strength. Exercise links to lung capacity. So there could be, if I get winded at the top of 3 flights of stairs and I don't want that, and I want to be able to do that, then my well-being may just be in that moment about learning how to get to the top of those 3 stairs without panting and being out of breath. And that's enough for them.
Yeah, that is so true. I just think about it. And also I was thinking about, this kind of like balancing, for example, exercising with other aspects in life. And, self-acceptance is a big piece of it because, the other day I had a busy week and I didn't go to the gym as often as I would. And I was like, oh, I feel horrible. And then I was
Did
like,
you?
no,
Did you feel guilty or horrible?
I
Like,
felt
did you
horrible.
physically? Do you mind describing that?
Yeah, like I felt lethargic and I was like, oh, is it because I'm not going to the gym? And then the full story is, you know what? I was actually feeling horrible because I was exercising too much. I wasn't resting enough. It's the complete
Yes.
opposite. Yeah.
Yes. Fantastic realization.
Yeah. It took me a while. It took me a while because I was like, why am I feeling so horrible? And then I was like, well, because I've been pushing myself to go to the gym when I should be resting. I had, I moved house, had an intense period of, like life changes and, lots of things. Life is busy sometimes. And, it's okay to not exercise. And it's such a hard thing to realize because, when you get into the rhythm and you're like, oh, this is like what I do. If I don't do it, I'm not myself. Not really.
Huh? What do you mean I'm not myself? Not really.
If I'm not doing something that I normally do, then I'm not myself.
Oh, yes.
That's not really the case. Yeah.
Not at all. And I like you, again, leaning into where you were. You were accepting where you were. And then look at, because you didn't let after you kind of cleared away the shoulds and the judgment of yourself, you were able to see where you were in life and be like, oh, I actually need to rest to feel better.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, so that's a lot of, backstories. But for our audience, obviously, some people might hear self-acceptance for the first time. I've heard it many times,
What does it mean to you?
For me personally?
Yep. Definition-wise, yeah.
Yeah. Well, definition-wise, to me, self-acceptance is simply embracing who I am, how I feel, and what is best for me at that particular period in time. And not blaming myself for not doing certain things. I know that I'm doing my best, at all times. And to me, that means that, if I feel a little off, I accept that is how it is. And that is not just about self-acceptance, actually. It's actually the definition for me, it kind of combines self-acceptance and radical acceptance, which is accepting other things that happened, not just, accepting where I am and, how I've been sort of carrying myself through life. So to me, the definition is slightly different from others, I guess, maybe the same. So yeah, what do you think?
And radical acceptance with DBT, and then there's ACT, which is acceptance and commitment. There's even therapies that go along with the acceptance push.
Yeah.
For me, self-acceptance, I started working with self-acceptance years and years ago. And part of it was self-esteem is something that people seem to see like we're bad if we don't have good self-esteem. But self-esteem is such a self-subjective judgment. There's different ways there's theories of how self-esteem, the drive behind it, what motivates it. And it's still kind of a judgment of self. And so some people may not ever get to be like, I judge myself as awesome. And that's okay. That's where self-acceptance came in and really kind of helped me. I think it helps a lot of my patients, clients, people, because it's something that you can attain and not feel like a failure if you don't. Make sense?
Yeah, totally.
The academic definition, I actually looked it up, and one of the academic definitions is it's an individual's acceptance of all of his, her, their attributes, positive or negative. I agree with that. And to me, self-acceptance means greeting all the different parts of you with bravery and compassion. Contrary to popular belief, self-acceptance does not mean to stop growing. Knowing yourself plus self-compassion plus reality equals self-acceptance. Now, if we break that down a little bit into what you were just talking about, the knowing yourself, those are kind of like knowing your traits, knowing, somebody asked me to describe myself a little while ago, and I remember I said that I'm intense. And they were like, and I said that with the different traits, but they said, you mean in a negative way? And I was like, sometimes. And they're like, you're okay with describing yourself that way? And I was like, yeah, it's true. So there's traits. We kind of get to greet these different parts of us. And if we can kind of lean into the acceptance instead of, say, the shame. I think there was a time in life when I was too intense or whatever. And so I would almost try to not feel those things. And I'm trying to use myself as an example because I don't give clients stuff. So if I'm feeling like ashamed of being too intense and kind of running away from it, I can't lean into it and learn, okay, I accept that I have an intensity about me. How does it serve? How does it hurt? Sometimes it's a superpower. Sometimes it super gets in the way. If I can accept that a trait can both help and hurt, I can figure out where I can allow that trait to support my life. And that's part of the first piece of it, which is knowing yourself, not judging the parts that you might feel. So many people have been told they're too sensitive. And so they have this like shame that they're sensitive. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, so you're very sensitive. If we take that away from judgment, isn't that kind of a beautiful thing? It might have been used against you or affected someone else in a way that maybe was undersensitive, but like, let's just lean into your oversensitive and take away the over and just say very. How does that look? How does that feel? Where does it help? Where does it hurt? And so it kind of takes away the shame of these qualities and allows you to just look at, oh my gosh, hello, I'm meeting parts of me. Oh boy, there's a bit of envy in me. There's a bit of kindness in me. There's a bit of, there's so many ingredients. It's this huge recipe.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice to just meet yourself in all the dark and the light.
Definitely.
Then if you add self-compassion, which is sometimes responding to yourself, even if you have to fake it till you make it, with a compassionate response, like you would, Lou, if you told me something, oh, you were talking earlier about, emotional eating. And I respond to you with, well, gosh, that is a coping skill. We, do it. And then let's say I go home and I emotionally eat, and then I'm like, I'm such a loser, blah, blah, blah. Because that's what we do. And so if I can start to try to recognize that I have compassion within me and try to use it, even if I don't use it perfectly, just recognizing, hey, what would I say to someone else as I'm saying that to myself, which leads us into the third piece, which is reality. Our brains are chattering all the time. Our brains are supposed to keep us alive. They're organizing, they're doing all these things. And if we just take even like 5 minutes and listen to our brains, it's amazing the things that they chatter at us. Sometimes they're ridiculous. Sometimes they're hilarious. Sometimes if you could talk back to the thought you hear in your head, it would be like, what did that come from?
Yeah.
So, I think in a moment when we have that not enoughness, that shame, that feeling in life that we're ultimately broken and bad, and so many people have that feeling, it's not necessarily reality. So to look at, if my brain starts screaming, oh my gosh, you're such an idiot. Why did you do that? Is it possible that it's just my brain screaming that? And I need to look at, am I really an idiot? Like, okay, would I have preferred that moment to be different? Yes. But in reality, did that, in this podcast, let's say I say an entire sentence that is not great, but I say 100 other sentences that are okay to good and maybe touch someone. Does one sentence that I really regret make me horrible or a loser or anything? No. My brain just may be conditioned to try to get me to safety. So, if I snap myself into shape, maybe that's my brain's way of trying to keep me safe. Maybe that's my brain's way of echoing something it's heard in the past. But is it reality? There are things called cognitive distortions that people can look up. And sometimes it's so relieving just to see that your brain thinks in a black and white way. And it's not necessarily true. It's just your brain style. Is any of this, as I'm speaking to, is any of this resonating for you on a personal level? Because I'm sorry, I kind of started getting on my little.
Oh, totally. I was actually thinking about it as you speak because I was thinking the thing that stuck with me the most is the first part where you talked about, you're really intense. And some people say, oh, you're so sensitive. I remember, actually, this is very interesting. It's like a self-discovery journey for me. But I resonate with that because I remember I was talking to someone and I was, sharing a story about my best friend, how I care about her, and I'm really worried about her because she was really depressed. And they went, "Why do you care about this thing so much? Why do you let it affect you?" So in a way, they were kind of saying you care too much. Now, when I heard that, I was kind of like, I felt weird. I felt a little off. I couldn't really pinpoint what it was that I was feeling. I didn't necessarily feel the same way because I still stood the ground that I cared a lot, which is a good thing because I have compassion. But I felt like I was shamed or criticized in a certain way. And then I was kind of like, okay, now, then I really needed to do an audit in my brain. I was kind of like, okay, do I actually care too much? Right? Because, like, obviously you don't want other people's opinions to affect you, but it's kind of hard to do that because, when you hear these things, you kind of have to process it. So after processing the situation, I just and talked to some other friends. I realized that I didn't care too much. I cared enough, and caring is a good thing. And when you're surrounded by the right people, they will see that as a good thing.
Getting to know yourself can lead you into environments and friendships that feel safe and reflect a safety back at you to be you.
Yeah.
And when you know yourself and you've accepted yourself, you can also adjust as you need for different environments. And I love how that connected with you in a way. You're right. You had to do a reality check. And let's say that your reality in the end was, I didn't care enough. I didn't do enough. That at least gives us a space when we can lean in. And please know, I'm continuing to kind of develop this concept because there's a lot of research on self-compassion, on self-esteem, on different selves.
Yeah.
But there is not a lot on self-acceptance. And so by leaning into those things, it kind of lets us take a good assessment, a neutral assessment. And it sounds like you were able to do that in such a healthy way.
It was hard though, because, that's when I also realized that, the person I'm talking to is not supposed to be in my life. Moment of truth. Yeah.
Or the person you need a lot more distance to stay safe.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to report that, that person is no longer in my life for that reason. It makes sense. It eventually made sense to me. And it kind of clicked because you know what? One of the things about well-being, and I want to lead us into the next part of the podcast, is about the relationship between self-acceptance and well-being. Now, to me, I accept myself as I am. And I know that there are, lots of things I need to work on. But I also know that caring is a good trait. And I don't think caring for me is something that I do too much. I think I do enough. And sometimes I think I don't do enough for the people that I love. And when I realized all of that, coupled with, okay, who do I surround myself with so I can work on this balance in my well-being, going back to my own definition. Now, you'll have your own definition. Other people will have their own definition. But I find that when you accept yourself as you are, you know what you need to work on. And you know who should be around you when you go on that journey, right? Because, you have to work on yourself. And if people are not really helping with that journey, then it's going to be extremely hard for your well-being. It's going to be tough on you. And maybe subconsciously you don't realize it, but it's there. It's kind of this weight. And so I realized that when I accept myself as I am and really cherish that part of me and know, okay, I need people that appreciate me caring, not the other way around. Then I started to realize that everything started to fall into place. Like, my sense of balance slowly came back to me. And it was kind of like exactly what you were doing, like a sigh of relief. I was like, what was I doing all this time surrounding myself with these weird people, when I should be with the people that appreciates me for who I am, as I appreciate myself.
Oh, it's so, and when you were asking about well-being and self-acceptance and distractions to it, sometimes it's about being in environments where you're getting feedback that you're not okay.
Yeah.
And that can be very, very distracting.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So distracting. So I know we briefly touched on this, and so I want to hear your take on it. That was my, really long-winded way of saying, this self-acceptance and well-being relationship is kind of like really tight-knitted, actually. When you think about it, there's so much more to discuss. So above and beyond what I just mentioned, what else would you like to add to the table, when it comes to how self-acceptance can affect our well-being?
Oh, gosh, if we're fighting accepting traits, if we're fighting accepting who we are, then we're probably not going to be living a life of high well-being. It's funny, I had asked a girlfriend, because I was talking about this and all the different definitions about well-being, because I always study things. And so I said to her, I was like, what's well-being? And she goes, self-acceptance. For her well-being is self-acceptance. So it's, amazing. I do believe that they are really, really closely tied. And sometimes there are things going on in life that you may not be able to meet parts of yourself. They're not safe to meet. And that's okay too. I think that self-acceptance, we have to recognize all of life. Like, we live in diet culture. Anybody in Western society is living in a life of diet culture. And so earlier you mentioned body image. Well, the messages that we're constantly getting are lose weight, exercise this amount of, you cannot be in the BMI's version of quote unquote overweight. And yet an elite athlete can actually be in the quote unquote obese category, but at their peak performance. So we get a lot of messages about what well-being is. And I think sometimes we would feel more well-being if we fit in. But then if we fit in, the sacrifices are so great, either morally, physically. There are so many people who are meant to live in larger bodies, and they are killing themselves with dieting and exercise in a way that is pulling away from their well-being. It's making them have nutrients that are not the full nutrients they need. Malnutrition. I'm trying not to say any of those like medicalized words, because in life, even if a doctor says, you need to lose weight, but you haven't said, I've been dieting my whole life and I think I shut down my metabolism, their well-being is not going to be even what the doctor says they need to do for their well-being. So well-being is a state of wellness, is a state of wholeness in so many domains, but that need to know oneself and accept oneself to get to well-being. Does that make sense?
Totally. I mean, I'm digesting all this information and thinking about, how it applies to my own life, because it's easy to talk about, harder to practice, because, we are our harshest critics, our own critic. And I think that is where conversations about well-being, about self-acceptance are important, because we have all these, opinions and these different trends or things that you should be doing. And I don't take that lightly, because I think it is actually quite damaging when you follow whatever people are saying. Oh, you should be doing this, should be doing that. If I should be doing all those things without considering who I am, then that is, a really toxic way of viewing the good things that you can do for your well-being. And you don't really have that level of self-acceptance, just like what you were saying. For some people, it means different things, and like not everybody needs to be a morning person, for example. So if someone sleeps in late, that's totally fine. And they accept that they need to rest in the morning, and they can function better at night. And I think that's beautiful. I talked to a colleague the other day And she was saying, she kept apologizing. She was like, I'm so sorry, like, I'm sorry for working late, because I tend to quote unquote scold my team for working late. And that's
protected mama.
Yeah. And that's when I realized, oh, okay, why are you apologizing? Tell me more. Are you working, more hours than required? And she said, no, actually not. I just function better at night. And that when it hit me, I was like, oh, so I'm actually being a not so great, leader here, because I'm telling her to not work late when she is functioning better at night. So then I realized, oh, okay, so she's self-accepting that she is better at night working, and then I'm telling her that she should be doing all these things. So anyway, you know exactly what I'm saying here. Long story short, I love her level of self-acceptance, and I also love it more if she didn't apologize and if she just had a conversation with me about it. So I told her, actually, I said, okay, I apologize. I didn't know that. But now that I know, why don't you adjust your hours so you work when you feel the best? Because we're a global team. It's doable.
But
and she said, yeah, that sounds great. I'll do that. I'll start doing that. And thank you. And I was like, no, thank you for telling me.
And so earlier when you said, I was not being a good leader, the accepting, like, in that moment, okay, you weren't being a good leader in that moment. You were, and your intentions were good, but it wasn't registering in the way that you wanted. Yeah. You accepted that, and then you could find a correction to it. But it's like, because you didn't have a ton of shame about being, having made a mistake, you just kind of accepted, okay, let me learn more. You learned about it, and then you gave an environment that could uplift each. And I think that's a really big piece of learning our values and our traits gives us kind of the humility to be curious about things so that we can adjust either self or others to be more in a well-being sphere. Remember when I said, for me, well-being for my clients, patients, people is so much about a constant stream of considering best interest. The intention of best interest. Yeah. How do I help them find their best interest, their well-being? Yeah. And accepting, just like you just did, I have to do that all the time to be like, oh gosh, I pushed on something. Let me accept it and let's adjust and find yours. And I think that I just think your team is really lucky to have you. That's what I'm going to say.
Well, thank you. I do my best. And actually, that's a good segue into the next part, because we're talking about healing from mistakes, right? So I can tell you, I'm much better at it now. But I think for a lot of people, making mistakes is like something that is just so bad. I used to be one of those people. I make a mistake and I cannot move past it.
Right.
And
why?
For me, yes, I'll tell you. So for me, it was this sense of, oh no, I am my mistakes. It used to be, oh, I am my mistakes. Like people will view me as this, person with all these mistakes that I've made. And I saw myself as the mistakes that I made instead of everything else. And so my question to you is, it's probably something to do with our brains. I'm sure you can give us a better explanation. I'm no scientist here, researchers here. And I think there's got to be a reason why we're so just easy to cling onto our mistakes rather than healing from it, letting it go and accepting the mistakes for what it is and actually accepting ourselves.
Right.
So why is that?
And gosh, accepting the wisdom of realizing, boy, I wish I'd preferred to do it a different way.
Yep.
Why is that? I don't know, because I'm about to join your club of I used to be my mistakes too. So,
okay.
Well, I think, on that, there's temperament, there's the filter in which we are raised, there's our values, there's the cognitive distortions, there's perfectionist traits, there's survival traits. In some environments, you have to perform well because there's no room for you if you don't, without either feeling like or actually experiencing some sort of erasure. So I think, I'm not going to speak from research. I'm just from a human being who's a therapist, who's been listening to people for a long time. Even before I was a therapist, I think safety is a really big piece of this. And what I mean by that is, if I am my mistake, I am the most unsafe I can feel at that moment. I am the most ashamed, the most shameful, the most awful. And if I can keep myself from doing those things, then I am safe in the world from criticism, from bullying, from being the fraud that I believe I'm like coming up with all these different things that I've heard. And I kind of feel like, as you say, why do we do that? I really believe that so much of what we do is a drive to feel safe. So by you labeling yourself a loser or a mistake, your entire being was a mistake for that one mistake you made, it's almost like you could punish yourself out of doing it again so that you'd be safe. Or maybe you're beating everyone else to seeing it because you're in an environment where people point at you and say, look at what you did wrong. Who knows? I suspect, though, that that's a big piece of why we jump there, plus thinking styles. It's just so many things stir together, and they're so personalized and individualized. Running a standardized research trial, I would be fascinated by how someone could engineer that to
Totally.
understand this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the most interesting caveat of this all is actually a question that our team had the other day. So it's kind of like a social forum. And someone in our team asked, are you a masterpiece or a work in progress? Now, I want to factor this into my question because I think that is extremely interesting in the sense that we've been talking about self-acceptance. We've been talking about mistakes. And you did say earlier in the conversation that, it's not about accepting everything and to not work on yourself. It is not that at all. It's actually accepting yourself so you can work on yourself. And so, yeah, for me, right? For me, the answer to that question when my team asked is I said, I'm a work in progress. I accept myself as I am. And I work on it. I keep working on myself. And so for that, I consider myself a work in progress, not to say that I'm not a masterpiece in my own right, but, I need to keep working on that because it's not a finished masterpiece. Probably it'll be finished when I die. But for now, I keep working on myself. And so a lot of answers came into that, discussion, and I find that discussion to be fascinating. I love it. But, from this perspective, when you think about, healing from mistakes, what is the balance between, accepting it for what it is, forgiving yourself versus working on it so you do better? Because sometimes when you accept it and you forgive yourself, maybe some people will take it to the extreme and just never think about it again. And it will come back to haunt them later in life where they don't, they didn't work on that part. And then, it comes back to haunt them. So I think there needs to be a balance to be struck here. But what is it really?
Rephrase the answer. Because I think you said some people will forgive themselves, move on, and never deal with it again until it comes up again.
Yeah.
So their journey will bring it back to them if it needs more attention. You're right. It does depend on temperament. And I can give an example from even last night. I was with some people I love dearly, and I have a little bit of a funny sense of I have my own sense of humor. Okay. And I realized this morning that one of the people, I might have put them in an uncomfortable position because I didn't know the history of something I joked about. I was saying something completely ludicrous. Yep. And then I realized when they looked at me, I was like, oh no, because there's some sort of history with that. So I just, I texted them and I took ownership of the discomfort that I caused. And so for me, I will be more sensitive about that with that person next time, because my intention is never to cause discomfort. Now I can flog myself and, live in the bad feeling of it. And I'll tell you a little story from something that recently happened that was really cool because I was working with, so I can live in that flogging, or I can move forward and not correct it at all. And then, you know what? I love this person. So at some point they're going to say to me, hey, Al, when you do this, it hurts, or they're going to get distant, or something's going to happen that's going to clue me in that something needs to be addressed or looked at. So if, we can't be aware of everything that we do, as much as we try to keep ourselves safe so that we're in the world, making only good relationships and positives, being ourselves is not going to sit right with everyone. That reflectiveness, I think, is such a huge piece. And some people are gifted with reflectiveness. Some people have formed defensiveness about reflection. Some people will go through life hurting other people and accepting. Like, I find that somebody who's listening to a podcast like this wants to grow. So they'll probably have more of a struggle with finding that balance. And actually, like, for them, a lot of people listening, because they're seeking to grow, I would say, you know what? You probably can forgive yourself more often than you're probably doing. Make sense? People who don't want to grow kind of don't even think about accepting themselves, not accepting themselves, self-esteem, how do I affect others, blah, 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 blah. That's okay. The world needs all of us for different things. I mean, when you really think about maximal function in the world, it needs all of us, the too sensitives, the not sensitive enoughs, and I'm using air quotes for anybody listening. So there is a balance, and it is that wonderful word, individualized. I could have probably not even thought back because last night was wonderful. But because I care about everyone and I remembered that flicker of an expression that made me inquisitive, then I thought to myself, oh gosh, as I link the rest of this night together, I think I know what happened. Got it. And I need to take ownership in case they're sitting with bad feelings because I love them. Yeah. I respect them. I like them. A joke is a joke. I didn't mean to hit a little scab and pick it off.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful to hear. And, thank you for sharing that reflection. I think it's important to know the degree of reflection we need in our lives. And you're so right in saying that the audience that is listening to this podcast wants to work on themselves. And so, they are going to be a bit more proactive in reflecting on their own journey and working on themselves. Yeah. But for others, I think, what I've learned is that we can all change. And so I believe that if, we take in the information and we accept that maybe there are certain things that we need to work on that will lead us to, a much more beautiful path, especially in our self-acceptance journey and the well-being journey, and not just accepting us for who we are, but also working on ourselves. It's going right back to that, masterpiece or work in progress sort of discussion. So, yeah.
I love I'm liking looping back to the well-being changing piece. For anyone listening, no matter what age you are, go to yourself 5, 10, 20 years ago. And what was your well-being at that time, or what felt like your well-being at that time, probably has changed quite a bit. And sometimes we go after something that we believe is well-being and only learn that it's not going to fit into our values. It's not going to actually be something that I can accept about myself and perform over and over and do over and over because it doesn't match. And so that's the other piece, is well-being is so fluid throughout our pursuits of it. I mean, gosh, 20s, think about the things we were doing for our well-being. There was not well-being. I think we're learning what our most high well-being is. And for me, just listening to say this to anyone listening, if you can weave in more self-acceptance with those components of, like, these are my traits, these are my values, I want to meet them, not judge them. That example I just used, I have a little bit of an off sense of humor. To some people, they may think it's weird. To some, they may not like it. I accept that some people will not appreciate it. And sometimes I have to be careful to make sure that it's not taken too seriously, especially because I'm a therapist. I can, sometimes people take my words a little heavier than meant, especially when I'm, being silly. So that's something I accept. And so I know I kind of need to be extra aware of how I use that trait because it's a little odd or off to some people.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. And so, we've covered a lot of ground here with, well-being, self-acceptance, healing from past mistakes, working on ourselves. Let's be a bit more practical for our audience. So let's go into our practice section.
Yep.
I just have one question in this part for you. What is a practice you would recommend to our audience who would like to work on their self-acceptance and heal from past mistakes?
So, oh my gosh, so many things pop up. I'm going to say to think of 10 traits that they have and look at the positives or look at the superpower and the, if you were a villain, you would take your superpower and use it in bad ways. So I would like you to look at both sides of it, no matter what trait it is. Let's say even you pick, let's say it's manipulative. Well, the good side of manipulative is that you're very persuasive. On a job resume, that's fab. So look at some of your traits, list out your values so that it can help you in your decisions now. And you may discover why some past quote unquote mistakes really felt like mistakes because they were outside your values. And that's not to beat yourself up over. It's to be like, oh my gosh, thank you for clarifying my values. Now I probably won't do that again. Sometimes mistakes are there to teach us that they were mistakes because if we don't do it, we can't get the sting or the discomfort to let us know, wow, that doesn't fit me. And that doesn't mean you're an all bad person. So to be able to almost, hear Lou talking about that earlier, hear anything from this, that's what I've said, that helps you to almost repeat it in your head and reassure yourself, especially as your anxiety ramps up that I'm a bad person. I made this mistake. I'm all bad. You did something and it affected you. Okay, we can work with that. And this was the story I was going to tell you. Someone dear to me and I were talking. They were so in the emotions and the shade, they felt like they had to heal before they could start living. Meaning they, had just had a breakup and they're so mad at themselves that they don't want to be alone. And they had to heal from not wanting to be alone. And I was like, no, you don't want to be alone and you don't like being alone. Can we work with that? If you can find ways to kind of rephrase that, I shouldn't this or I shouldn't, stop saying shouldn't. That's a huge practice. Even to your friends, you should see this, you should do this. Please say it more accurately. I love this so much that I want to share it with you.
Yes, please.
Should makes a shame. The SH kind of goes over into shame often because then they feel bad if they don't do it. You feel bad if you don't do a should. Rephrase your thinking. Get really accurate with how you're thinking and what you're feeling. I am a therapist who does not believe in preaching things I don't actually try or practice or live by. So I have so many things that I want you to try, but hopefully some of those worked. Another thing that's huge is well-being. From this podcast, Lou, draw a pie chart and look at all the different areas of wellness. Wellness is not just health and laboratory work, meaning physical health, spiritual, conversational, relational, meditational, balance, whatever's important to you can go in that pie. And then you can look at it in a non-judging way. How am I doing on that? What needs more attention? What do I want to give more attention?
Yeah, totally. I agree with that completely. You didn't just give us one practice. I think there are multiple ones we can take from, that little bit of information.
And I think there's one that none of us ever talk about, or rarely do we talk about, but it comes up. Why do our mistakes come to haunt us right before we go to sleep? And then our eyelids fly open and we're tormented. There's a lot less distractions probably right before we go to sleep. When you feel your body tense and your eyelids fly open, if you can try to notice the panic and kind of go to factually, what happened? Okay, factually, I said something hurtful. Okay, how do I feel about that? If I feel bad about that, how might I be able to make some amends, make it right? If you can kind of notice that you're spinning in the emotions and try to shift to looking at the fact, here's what happened, it can give you a little more freedom about finding ways to work through the feels of it, but to also be proactive in accepting we're not perfect. We're going to grow. We're going to hurt other people. We're going to hurt ourselves. We can find ways to accept and not see ourselves as all mistakes, as Lou said earlier, all broken, all bad, all shameful, all those one things.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's beautiful to hear, because everyone needs a comforting reminder sometimes, and that's exactly it. It's a journey. It's so hard already as we go through life, and so I think being our own critic is tough. And on top of that, we have critics from all different directions. So I think, truly cultivating that sense of self-understanding, self-awareness, and then self-acceptance is, I think, a really strong tool to help us grow and just, nurture our sense of self and well-being in life. And I've really enjoyed talking about this topic with you. Honestly, we could go for another hour, but I'm conscious of time. I know that we should be wrapping up about now. So before we let you go, if our audience would like to find out more about your work or get in touch with you, where should they go?
Thank you. I have a main website, which is therapyhelps.us, like kind of the sentence, therapy helps us. It might be US. I think anyone can access it though. And then I am constantly writing for Psychology Today. I am out there. If you Google Alli Spotts-De Lazzer, it may not all be positive, but I am there.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks again for being here today. I had a great chat and lots of things to reflect on after today. So I'll be doing that and take you on your advice to think about the 10 traits of myself.
Thank you very much. And thank you anyone who spent time today, because time is precious. So it is appreciated that you chose to stay and listen to us. You are valuable. Bye.
Absolutely. You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.